Hello everyone, my name is Mariah and I am a biology and chemistry tutor at the Learning Resource Center. And today I will be talking to you about the theory of polar versus nonpolar bonds. So when I go over polar versus nonpolar bonds with my students, I have found it beneficial for them to look at this chart that I'm about to fill in here. So in your various courses, you have been introduced to two different types of bonds. One of them is an ionic bond, and the other is a covalent bond. And as we go into polar versus nonpolar bonds, we'll actually come to see that a covalent bond can be further classified into a polar or a nonpolar bond. So the question then becomes, what causes a bond to be polar or nonpolar? So one of the main causes for a polar or nonpolar bond is how they share their electrons. So a polar bond has unequally shared electrons. And on the opposite end of that, nonpolar bonds have equally shared electrons. So let's look at a polar bond. So right here I've written a polar bond, oxygen bonded to a hydrogen. And within this bond we have two electrons. In a perfect world, these electrons will be right in the middle of this bond. But when what actually ends up happening is that the differences in electronegativity causes the electrons to be shared unequally. So differing electronegativities difference in electronegativity will cause these electrons to actually move closer to oxygen because oxygen is more electronegative. And I'm going to short this to E neg. So because oxygen is more electronegative, our electrons move closer to oxygen. Electrons are negatively charged, so what ends up happening is that oxygen acquires a partial negative charge, and that is delta negative. Because the electrons are closer to oxygen, it makes sense that hydrogen then becomes partially positive because the negative subatomic particles are further away from it. So, a polar bond has unequally shared electrons. They're unequally shared because there's a difference in electronegativity between the two atoms. So, hydrogen is less electronegative. Because there's a difference in electronegativity, because the electrons are unequally shared, we end up with partial charges in our bond. Now, when we look at a nonpolar bond, we'll actually come to see that the two atoms involved in a nonpolar bond have the same or very similar electronegativity. So, looking here, I have drawn a nonpolar bond, a nitrogen bonded to a nitrogen. And since the nitrogens are the same, they therefore have the same electronegativity, or they're the same element, so they have the same electronegativity. Therefore, the electrons in the bond are shared equally between them, right in the middle. Because they're equally shared, they do not have any partial charges like we see up here with our polar bonds. So a polar bond has no partial charges. So that's your theory behind your polar versus nonpolar bonds. If you have any more questions concerning these bonds, I recommend that you come to the LRC and you check out our times available with our chemistry tutors. Thank you.